Hello, friends, and welcome to Season 2 of The Membership. Just a quick note here before we get started. First of all, we want to thank all of you, our listeners, for the support you showed us during Season 1. From the in-person comments we received at the recording of our live first episode, to all of your kind and thoughtful iTunes reviews, social media posts, and emails, the amount of support our fellow members have given us has been wonderful. It's this support that inspires us to continue our work and to want to make the podcast even better in Season 2 and beyond. And we're hoping some of you can help us. While we certainly understand that not all of our fellow members will be able to support us financially, we'd like to ask those of you who are to consider making a monthly donation through Patreon at patreon.com/membershippod. Your donations will go toward covering the costs associated with the podcast, including website hosting fees, recording equipment, editing help, and travel costs for future interview episodes. And any amount that you can afford to donate will be a huge help, even if it's just $1 a month. All monthly patrons at the $1 a month level or above will be invited to a private Facebook group where we'll post special updates about upcoming episodes, bonus content, and even share unedited episodes and interviews. So go to patreon.com/membershippod to pitch in today.
Hello, guys. How are you doing tonight?
Doing all right.
Very well. We're getting ready for maybe a tiny bit of snow tonight, which I'm looking forward to. Really looking forward to, as in I'm hoping for. But yeah, extend the Thanksgiving break. But
Yeah.
So we're recording this the weekend after Thanksgiving. So did you guys have a good holiday?
Yeah,
it
was good.
Yeah, it was a different one for us. We were normally with my parents, but they were in California visiting my brother, and so we did kind of an unusual thing for our family in which, like, it was just the four of us at home. All of our housemates were gone, and so we watched movies all day, and like we each picked our favorite snack. Like each member of the family got to pick their favorite snack, and we just ate snacks and watched movies all day because we had kind of our house Thanksgiving on Saturday, and that was a lot of fun.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah.
I'm jealous. That's so relaxing. That's great. I on my end in the last 48 hours, I very likely cracked a rib, and my daughter is upstairs and can't walk because she ran into something and hurt her leg, and so we spent our weekend getting numerous injuries. So that wasn't the only thing that happened, but that was. If we're doing this over Skype, so if you guys see me wincing, just don't feel you need to respond. That's just me. Yeah.
I thought you were going to somehow connect the cracked rib to eating too much turkey or something like that.
No. I do have a chipped tooth that I chipped on Thanksgiving on a fork 5 years ago. Yeah. That's. I don't usually admit that one openly, and I wasn't biting that hard. It was bad luck. Yeah.
Your family's the one that should really keep lay low on Thanksgiving.
No kidding. That's why I'm jealous. Yeah. Well, next year.
Well, a little peek behind the curtain. We are recording relatively soon after doing our last recording, and that's because we're trying to get another episode in under the wire because Jason has big changes ahead. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So my wife is very, very close to giving birth to our first child. We're having a little girl. Her due date is in less than 2 weeks now, so it's kind of at the anytime stage. So if I just disappear in the middle of this recording, you guys know where I'm going.
Do you have your go bag packed?
My wife does. I sort of feel like I use all of the things that I would pack on a daily basis. So
you're wearing your go bag.
I'm wearing my go bag. Yeah, that's right. So yeah.
Well,
So,
that's cool.
anyways, yeah, we're excited and terrified and all those things. So,
I'm really happy for you. This is going to be great.
thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for real.
Well, I'm glad too that we could get at least one more episode in
Yeah.
before that happens. We only have one farm fresh point this week, and that's for me. It's when I was at the library just tonight with my daughters. I'm in charge of picking out kids' books for my daughter's kindergarten classroom. And as I was looking through some of the new stuff, I found a book that was really beautiful. It's called The 100-Year Barn. It's by Patricia McLaughlin, and it came out just in September. And the story and the setting just reminded me of so much of what I love about Barry's work. It's just about a family that in 1919 built what they called the 100-Year Barn. 100 people built it, and the hope is that it would stand for a century and maybe longer. And it's just kind of about the life that happens in this barn over the course of about 100 years. And it's just really, really sweet. And that in turn reminded me that there's another kid's book that I've known about for a while, but I don't think we've talked about. And that is a book called A River of Words, a picture book, and the subtitle is The Story of William Carlos Williams. Came out in 2008. As many Barry fans know, William Carlos Williams is a favorite of Barry's. I'm guessing that if Wendell Berry was going to host a podcast about his favorite writer, it might be or one of his favorite writers. It might be William Carlos Williams. He's actually written a whole book about Williams's work.
We need to reach out to him, get this thing going.
Yeah, sorry.
What has he been doing? What has he been doing?
Come on.
Anyway, I recommend both those books for not only listeners who have kids of their own, but listeners who just love great picture books. And so we'll have links to both of those in the show notes.
You've inspired me. I didn't think I had anything to bring up for the Farm Fresh points, but I've got a children's book to bring up as well.
Really?
Actually,
Cool.
that my daughter, her birthday was at the end of October, and my wife, we always like to get a decent amount of books for our kids at every sort of gift giving holiday, and she had found this book that I'd never heard of, but she ordered, and it's called We Are the Gardeners, and it's by Joanna Gaines, and it just came out this past March, so it's a really, really new book. And it is the very basic premise is that it's a large family. It's like a husband and a wife, and I think 4 kids. And it starts as just this family has been sort of wrapped up in all the wrong things. Like their focus has been in the wrong place. And then finally they go out and they buy like a fern or something like that. And it dies like immediately because they overwater it and they're like, they don't know what they're doing. But then like over the course of the book, which it's a decently long children's book, beautifully illustrated children's book, they become a family just step by step incrementally who becomes this family who's really in touch with their garden and just with like the earth in general. It's not super preachy. It feels very like real world. We did this, then we did this, then we did this, kind of like, their steps. And I mentioned that it was a long book because both of our kids were really kind of riveted by it. I mean, it took a while to read, but they loved it. Especially my daughter has asked to read it several times. So it's called We Are the Gardeners. It's Joanna Gaines and Juliana Swaney is the illustrator. It's a great book.
That is really cool. I just finished reading a book by Joanna Gaines that she wrote with her husband Chip. So Chip and Joanna Gaines.
That's who that is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
They do the show.
But that name sounds awfully familiar. Yeah.
Okay. And Molly, my 12-year-old, loves Fixer Upper, and so we've been watching some of it, and has been a lot of fun. And so I just listened to their story on audiobook. It was easy and fun, and I just kind of needed something that was easy and fun. But it was kind of cool to hear more of their story.
Cool.
All right. So today we are going to be talking about Barry's 1970 poetry collection, Farming: A Handbook, and we used the poems that are found in the new collected poems. So I actually didn't check to see if everything was here from the original collection, but we
It's a
just went
lot, though.
a lot. Yeah, you're right.
It's like 50 pages of poetry.
Yep. Yeah. So if not all, then much. And so I guess we'll just kind of before we get to the most basic of questions, which is, just simply, did you like it or what did you like? I had a question about the title because it's not farming a handbook with handbook as one word. It's farming a hand book. And I wanted to know or understand better the significance of that. And I was curious if either one of you had some insight.
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like I went into uh, like early John Pattison mode with some of the first episodes we recorded. When you remember, we would talk about like words that get repeated a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
And I like locked in on something very much like that. And one was that the word airy came up a lot, several times. But the other is that I think it's called a handbook because there are, and I'm just throwing this number out there without being able to reference back. There are probably a dozen poems that have the imagery of like digging your hands into the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like when I see that title, that's immediately what I think about. There's a lot of that. Like there's and then the one I noticed it, and I actually had made a note on the page, was in the prayers and sayings of the Mad Farmer, number 7. He says, "Put your hands into the mire; they will learn the kinship of the shaped and the unshapen, the living and the dead." That was the first time that I thought I literally circled it and put lots of "put your hands in the dirt" imagery. I wrote that over on the side, and there's another one where he talks about like the hands becoming roots, and I mean that's what makes the most sense to me. I think that it's a book about farmers and farming, a lot of it, but there's so much imagery about like not just planting things, but kind of like being connected, like physically connected to the earth.
Yeah, I think that's great. I can see that. And it's an interesting contrast with how I think the word handbook, all one word, is often used as like a kind of an operating manual for a machine. Um, so there may be some contrast there, between the operating manual approach and the approach of actually getting your hands into the dirt.
Yeah, because he even says at one point in the collection, he makes the comment of that a farm's the greatest output of a farm is
Yes,
the actual land and like the farmer itself, a good farmer
the farmer's
itself.
mind. Yep. Mm-hmm.
The farmer's mind, not the actual crop that's yielded, because there's so much out of your control in that. So it is almost like a anti-handbook in that sense, because he's not telling you how to do it well. He's just telling you how to be a good, how to be a good farmer, how to be sort of honestly connected to your land. I think is that the song in a year of catastrophe. Is that the one where he talks?
No, that's in prayers and sayings too.
Oh, is it? Okay, because
that's prayers and sayings number 13.
Gotcha. Okay. Oddly enough, I just opened and I was flipping through to song in a year of catastrophe, and I see the third verse is, "And I went and put my hands into the ground, and they took root and grew into a season's harvest." So there was that line I was thinking of, oddly enough. But
maybe we'll pause and read number 13 from the prayers and sayings.
Yeah.
Poem. So in prayers and sayings of the Mad Farmer, there are 13 prayers and sayings, and so this is the very last one. It's the longest one, I believe. And it goes like this. Don't worry and fret about the crops. After you have done all you can for them, let them stand in the weather on their own. If the crop of any one year was all, a man would have to cut his throat every time it hailed. But the real products of any year's work are the farmer's mind and the cropland itself. If he raises a good crop at the cost of belittling himself and diminishing the ground, he has gained nothing. He will have to begin over again the next spring worse off than before. Let him receive the season's increment into his mind. Let him work it into the soil. The finest growth that farmland can produce is a careful farmer. Make the human race a better head. Make the world a better piece of ground.
Yeah. I'll say that hit me even harder hearing it through your voice. There's something about how you read it. You read it very well.
Mm-hmm.
But that, and this section, and I guess that's as good a place as any to start, just as far as going through these this collection, because I think we've kind of accidentally stumbled upon this sort of beating heart at the middle of this collection, and it makes me think. It actually brings me back to your conversation in the last episode with David Klein, especially the sections where you guys were talking about drudgery. I think is what you were talking about, like
yes,
but like drudgery and the fact that nothing is drudgery if you have that connection, and that it's not about how wide you're farming, but about how well you're farming. And I'm saying this as someone who is, I am not a farmer. I would not call myself a farmer. I mean, of course, I'm barely a gardener in that, and that's not. I know for a lot of people that's what draws them to Berry's work pretty heavily, and I guess I just come at it from a different direction. But of course, that metaphor is so fertile.
Right. And you could almost apply it to any kind of work that you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are, I don't know, if you're, I mean, Tim, teaching a good lesson, right? Like creating a good lesson, like if you are belittling yourself in the process of doing that, you are diminishing who you are going to be as a teacher for all those other generations of students that may come across your path.
Yeah.
You're so focused on the end product of that one particular lesson.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that I started to like kind of wrestle around with that line, then just following that same kind of thought process. The finest growth that farmland can produce is a careful farmer. So the metaphor, I think, would then be the finest growth that a classroom can produce is a careful teacher, which for some reason feels a little different to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
It feels like it should be the finest growth that a classroom can produce as a careful student, which I think is sort of a sidestep, but also pretty powerful concept to say that it's not a proficient test score. It's a careful. Well, we'll just say student and teacher, because I don't know, but
sure.
I'm just processing out loud at this point because you're making me think. But yeah.
And isn't it wonderful that there are 13 stanzas to this poem? Yeah. Like he chose to have 13 like unlucky 13. This is the mad farmer talking.
Yeah.
Like
appropriate. Yeah. And
not 12 for one for every tribe of Israel, or
right, exactly.
No, I'm gonna go with 13.
That plus one. Yeah.
13 ways of looking at a blackbird.
Yeah.
It's probably in there somewhere. Yeah. Well, I mean, while we're in the prayers and sayings of the mad farmer, there are a couple of these that are, I think, some of his most famous like quips or famous little lines that I've kind of come across in a lot of different places, and two of them stuck out to me. One is number 5. Don't own so much clutter that you'll be relieved to see your house catch fire. Holy smokes. I just immediately like tossed the book over to my wife. I was like, hey, read number 5, and tossed it over. I was like, I think we need to rethink some things.
Yeah,
so that one of course stuck out because I do see that one elsewhere, but actually my favorite within that series of little poems, one that I hope to think about every day from now on, and I think it had been many, many years since I had thought about it. When I rise up, this is number 8. When I rise up, let me rise up joyful like a bird. When I fall, let me fall without regret like a leaf. Mm-hmm. And that is, I was really, really struck by that as a sort of calling and benediction for the day or something like. That's a progression that I really believe in, but it's helpful to have a way to put it that's so simple.
Yeah.
I heard somewhere that one of the theories for why birds sing in the morning is to let the other birds know they're still alive.
Huh.
And I don't know if it's the joy of being alive or just an announcement.
Yeah.
But that came to mind when I read number 8. When I rise up, let me rise up joyful like a bird.
Yeah.
I'm gonna rise up singing because I'm still alive.
It reminds me of if your kids watched the Peter Rabbit movie, the new
Yeah.
Peter Rabbit movie,
Yeah.
and there's the rooster that like speaks, and so like every time he wakes up in the morning, instead of just like saying cock-a-doodle-doo, he's saying like, "What? The sun came up again? Here I am again." Like, I would, if I knew it was going to come up again, I wouldn't have fertilized all those eggs. Um, now I have to be present to my children. Yeah, but and you know that story is really interesting to me. I've got a personal story to connect to that because when I first moved to Johnson City and was going to Milligan, my parents lived in a little farmhouse in Gray, Tennessee, which is just like a one town over. And the home that they were renting from a family friend from back in the 70s when they originally lived here was, I'm going to say, 30 yards from train tracks. Probably, yeah. Not if it was further, it wasn't much further. And those trains ran all night long. And so I have these vivid memories of waking up to and hearing, like, probably subconsciously being woken up by these big like freight trains that are coming through. But by the time I actually rose out of sleep, it was me in the middle of the night with birds like chirping, which is a really weird sensation. And then to look at my phone or look at my watch or whatever at the time and find out that it was 1 o'clock in the morning. And just to think of them as like these birds being panicked by this roaring train that rolls through and just being like, I'm fine, guys, don't worry, I'm gonna be okay, because I was kind of feeling the same way at that moment. Yeah, it wasn't exactly those days in my life weren't exactly poem 12, let me wake in the night and hear it raining and go back to sleep. So let me wake to the roaring of a train.
Jason, did you have a favorite from these sayings?
Yeah, I did. I think number 11 really struck me as someone who works for a for-profit business, and that can sometimes produce a little bit of cognitive dissonance. If you're someone whose head is in Wendell Berry's writing, but this really sort of struck me. I don't know if any of our listeners are in that position as well. But this is number 11. By the excellence of his work, the workman is a neighbor. By selling only what he would not despise to own, the salesman is a neighbor. By selling what is good, his character survives his market. So yeah, that sort of struck home to me as, if you're someone like me who feels sometimes a little weird about participating in the market, focusing on quality and the durability and the reliability of what you're offering seems to be a way to go.
Yeah. I had highlighted that one as well.
From my perspective, that one did stick out as well as a really helpful way. For you, it was from the kind of first person standpoint, but it's really a really helpful section as far as how to see everyone else, because we live in a world that's so heavily saturated with salesmen, by 500,000 other names,
Sure.
But whether it's social media or whether it's just moving through a world that is so like richly covered in advertising and is so richly covered in people who are trying to get by, that it's it's just kind of a good filter. It's a really helpful filter to have handy.
Yeah, that's good. What about some other favorite poems from this collection? Tim, let's head back to you.
Yeah, I can. I'd like to. I'd like to dive right into one that really, really kind of took me off guard. One that I don't remember ever reading, or I guess that means that the last time I read this collection, this one hadn't particularly stuck out to me. I hadn't even made any notes on it the last time I had read it. But this one, I was actually sitting. It was right after my daughter had woken up from a nap or something, and I kind of stumbled out sleepily, and she was trying to get my attention, which I was happy to give to her. But I was also reading. I was like, "Hang on, just come up here with me for a second." And sat her in my lap, and I read it out loud, which she wasn't really comprehending. Just was listening and kind of looking at the page and trying to figure it out. She's only 3, so she's trying to sort this out. But then at the end, I got my pencil out, and I wrote a bunch of stars next to the title, and 5 stars, and she wrote. And she's like, "Daddy, why'd you write?" And then she counted them 5 stars next to that. And I said, "Because I really love this poem." And she said, "You like this 5 stars?" I was like, that was just how many stars fit. I wasn't like, it wasn't some rating system. But this is the poem "Awake at Night." Late in the night, I pay the unrest I owe to the life that has never lived and cannot live now. What the world could be is my good dream and my agony when, dreaming it, I lie awake and turn and look into the dark. I think of a luxury in the sturdiness and grace of necessary things, not in frivolity, that would heal the earth and heal men. But the end, too, is a part of the pattern, the last labor of the heart, to learn to lie still, one with the earth again, and let the world go. For me, hearing that one, it really served as a perfect quiet meditation on kind of the mindset that I'd like to be in more often than I am. I felt at home in reading that, but kind of at home in the same sense that you feel like that's what I've been meaning to think, or like that's what I've been meaning to do, or that's what I try to do, but I just fail at it over and over again. And I think one section the lines that really hit me the hardest, the moment when this poem really sort of concreted itself in my mind, was I think of a luxury in the sturdiness and grace of necessary things, not in frivolity. The sturdiness and grace of necessary things, because I live in a world that's we kind of fall into the trap. I'm constantly falling into the trap of just trying to entertain myself as often as possible. We've got 100,000 shows we can stream. We've got ebooks everywhere, Kindle daily deals that you can download and have a book that you'll read in 17 years or whatever. Like, you're just constantly like fishing for all these things that, while some of them might be good and might be worthwhile things, is just kind of a frivolous extra in your day when you're surrounded by so many necessary things that then become, whether it's kids, whether it's your home, whether it's your work, they become burdens when really that's kind of an upside down way of thinking. So I love that phrase, the sturdiness and grace of necessary things, because I think that's a really good tagline for how we should think about whether it's work or family or parenting or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, and then the learn to lie still, that ending is a kind of a perfect pairing with the other line, the sturdiness of necessary things, and then just to learn that in the moments that something is not assigned that you have to do, to have that, that last labor of the heart is to learn to just lie there still, one with the earth, one with one with your family, whatever, but and let the world go, because the world so often is just a big stack of those frivolous things that it's so easy to convince ourselves are the most necessary, because we deserve them. We deserve those frivolous things because we work hard. So yeah, that was definitely the highlight of the collection for me. That's the one that I found myself coming back to over and over again. I think it just caught me at the right time.
Yeah.
I like
kind
how
of like a.
Go ahead.
I mean, just in that last line, yeah, that to learn to lie still, one with the earth again, and let the world go. Like, I mean, there's kind of that sense of like mystical detachment or renunciation there, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is, you're so concerned about the world too, but if you are detached, that's the place where you can sort of return to the world as a full person and actually be able to care for it.
Yeah, yeah, it does feel very like monastic or
Mhm. Or
well,
Buddhist
like
even.
Buddhist. Yeah,
Yeah,
smacks of the Desert Fathers or the
right.
yeah or something. Yeah.
Jason, was there one poem in this collection that you kept coming back to again and again as one that you,
Oh
as sort
man.
of the highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have thoughts about the Mad Farmer, and we can come back to this.
We
Uh,
will.
but
We will
but
for
but a
sure.
figure, but a figure of madness that I thought was almost more compelling than the Mad Farmer is the figure of Mrs. Gaines
Mm.
in
Mm-hmm.
Meditation in the Spring Rain. I don't really know how much of this poem to read because it's kind of long.
Yeah.
But I'll at least start at the beginning to give a flavor of it. In the April rain, I climbed up to drink of the live water leaping off the hill, white over the rocks. Where the mossy root of a sycamore cups the flow, I drank and saw the branches feathered with green. The thickets, I said, send up their praise at dawn. Was that what I meant? I meant my words to have the heft and grace, the flight and weight of the very hill, its life rising. Or was it some old exultation that abides with me? Will not soon escape the faith of our fathers, no more than crazy old Mrs. Gaines, whom my grandmother remembers standing balanced 80 years ago atop a fence in Port Royal, Kentucky, singing, "One Lord, one faith, one cornbread." they they had a cage built for her in a room, nearly as big as the room, not cramped up, and when she grew wild, they kept her there. But mostly she went free in the town, and they allowed the children to go for walks with her. So there's so much going on there that's so wonderful. Obviously, the humor of one Lord, one faith, and one cornbread. Uh, but he sort of begins the poem. He's in this natural setting. Um, the thickets, I said, send up their praise at dawn. And then he sort of steps back from that and sort of rethinks that as like, is that just an old fashioned way of saying this? I'm casting this natural scene in a religious light. And then that acknowledgement of will not soon escape the faith of our fathers. I don't know, that really sort of rang true to me as someone who uh, is holding on to my Christian faith, sort of in spite of myself. At a lot of times, when I catch sort of churchy phrases crossing my lips, I sort of recoil like this, just because. I don't know. My faith has undergone somewhat of a deconstruction, and I've come to a place where I'm sort of okay with that, and I'm still sort of holding on to it because it's not that easy to shake. So I really resonated with that, and then sort of the end of this poem, yeah, just he goes in a really mystical direction with it. I'll just sort of after he talks about Mrs. Gaines for a while and sort of likens her to, he says, I'm thankful that they don't, that they let her go free in the town, and I'm thankful that they also do the same thing to poets as well. And even if they put me in a cage, I'm hoping that it will be a big cage that I can walk around in.
A
But then
commodious cage.
a commodious cage, yeah. Then he sort of ends with, the thickets, I say, send up their praise at dawn. One Lord, one faith, and one cornbread forever. But hush, wait, be as still as the dead and the unborn, in whose silence that old one walked, muttering and singing, followed by the children. Then there's sort of a line break here. For a time, for a time there, I turned away from the words I knew and was lost. For a time, I was lost and free, speechless in the multitudinous assembling of his word. So there's this play on both madness that is throughout this whole collection with the Mad Farmer, as well as this sort of emptying that allows you to see the assembling of the word of creation. I guess I should back up and read one more section to make that make sense. Surely there is a great word being put together here. I begin to hear it gather in the opening of the flowers and the leafing out of the trees and the growth of birds' nests and the crotches of the branches and the settling of the dead leaves into the ground and the whittling of beetle and grub and my thoughts moving in the hill's flesh. So thinking through creation as something that is always happening in the Word, I think referencing the first chapter of John's Gospel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know completely what to do with all of that, but it's just so fascinating to me and resonates with me.
You mentioned the theme of madness throughout, both in this poem and in the Mad Farmer poems, and it's worth really mentioning that most of these poems seem to have been written in 1968, 1969, where like a time in which the world itself seemed to be going mad, seemed to be going crazy. He has references in a number of his poems to things that were happening in the news. He has poems with specific dates as the titles: February 2nd, 1968, March 22nd, 1968. The latter was 6 days after the massacre at My Lai. Again and again. And this is, of course, 1968 is the year that Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated, then Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated, the riots at the Democratic National Convention. Vietnam is ramping up, and like these massacres are they're trying to cover up a lot of this stuff. Like he's seeing the world around himself going crazy, and so in order just to stay true to his values, he has to be contrary, like in relationship to the world. Makes it seem like he's the crazy one, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same question that I don't know, I pose to students whenever I teach Hamlet, right? Is Hamlet going crazy, or is the world around him actually crazy, and his reactions are actually the sane ones, right? I mean, it's the same. I should know this, but is it Paul or Jesus who talks about being considered as fools?
That's Paul.
Yeah. So it's that same sort of strain when the world around you is crazy, and when everyone else considers insanity to be sanity, then you're gonna start to look insane. You know.
With that, can I read one of my favorite poems?
Please.
Yeah.
This is The Contrariness of the Mad Farmer. I am done with apologies. If contrariness is my inheritance and destiny, so be it. If it is my mission to go in at exits and come out at entrances, so be it. I have planted by the stars in defiance of the experts, and tilled somewhat by incantation and by singing, and reaped, as I knew, by luck and heaven's favor, in spite of the best advice. If I have been caught so often laughing at funerals, that was because I knew the dead were already slipping away, preparing a comeback. And can I help it? And if at weddings I have gritted and gnashed my teeth, it was because I knew where the bridegroom had sunk his manhood, and knew it would not be resurrected by a piece of cake. Dance, they told me, and I stood still. And while they stood in quiet in line at the gate of the kingdom, I danced. Pray, they said, and I laughed, covering myself in the earth's brightnesses, and then stole off gray into the midst of a revel, and prayed like an orphan. When they said, I know that my Redeemer liveth, I told them, He's dead. And when they told me, God is dead, I answered, He goes fishing every day in the Kentucky River. I see him often. When they asked me what I like to contribute, I said no. And when they had collected more than they needed, I gave them as much as I had. When they asked me to join them, I wouldn't, and then went off by myself and did more than they would have asked. Well, then, they said, go and organize the International Brotherhood of Contraries. And I said, did you finish killing everybody who was against peace? So be it. Going against men, I have heard at times a deep harmony, thrumming in the mixture. And when they ask me what, I say I don't know. It is not the only or the easiest way to come to the truth. It is one way. That's one of the poems I read to my wife this morning. And I have a reputation for being contrary. But there's a difference between my contrariness and Barry's contrariness. Barry is contrary because he is staying true to those values and principles, which makes him seem crazy in the eyes of the world. I just don't like doing what people tell me to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought I was going to say this poem could be the contrariness of my 6-year-old son, because I see a lot of that in him too. So maybe you guys have a similar, I don't know, Enneagram or something.
Enneagram 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I told her when I finished reading, I said, this poem makes me want to be more contrary. And I saw her roll her eyes and sigh. And
it's like impossible.
Yeah. But then I said, here's what I mean by it. It means, what it really means is this poem makes me want to live more consistent with my own values. This is a poem that he read on the Bill Moyer show.
Yeah.
And if I knew it was safe to play the clip, like copyright-wise, we would play Barry reading it himself. And speaking of that, if anybody out there is a copyright expert, let us know if it would be okay.
Shoot us an email.
Do we have any attorney friends out there? Yeah. I mean, I think I like this poem a lot. And I think, it really does kind of highlight the humor that we're starting to see come into his poetry. That to me is like one of the distinctive marks of this particular collection. I mean, there's some poems in this collection that seem to me to belong to the previous collection openings. Some of the more serious poems that are still dealing directly with, particularly the Vietnam War, seem to be, at least, if not to belong to the previous collection, to be of a piece with the previous collection. But this collection starts to introduce this idea of madness and humor that I think is really well captured here.
That's right. I think that this is actually the first time. This collection is the first in which we have a Mad Farmer poem. Right? Yeah.
Now, I wonder if we could talk through like who we think the Mad Farmer is and what we make of who the Mad Farmer might be.
Mm-hmm.
Because I did a little bit of reading. There's actually a collection. I've got it here. You guys can see it. Our listeners can't see it. Called The Mad Farmer Poems. That's a collection. We should say that there are other Mad Farmer poems that appear in later collections that we'll get to at a later date. But there's a collection with some really lovely illustrations that was put together. I'm trying to find the year here. and I'm not seeing it. It doesn't have a normal title page. But sometime in the early 2000s, I think. and we can put that in the show notes. But anyways, it's a collection of the Mad Farmer poems throughout Berry's poetry. And there's a foreword in here by Ed McClanahan, to whom Berry either dedicates or mentions in sort of the
he dedicates a couple poems to him.
Yeah, to Ed McClanahan in the Mad Farmer Revolution, the first Mad Farmer poem. And so Ed McClanahan has a foreword in this book that says the Mad Farmer is definitely not Wendell Berry. He is a character that sort of rose up out of Berry. So it's probably not right to read Berry as, you know, the Mad Farmer as Berry's surrogate necessarily. I mean, even in that poem that you just read, John, you know, the bit about at the wedding, let's see, I knew where the bridegroom had sunk his manhood and knew it would not be resurrected by a piece of cake. That doesn't sound like something Wendell Berry would say, saying all of the lovely things that he has to say about marriage, but it is this character. So I think it is important to note that there is sort of a distance between Wendell Berry and this character. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the tone of the Mad Farmer poems changes. I mean, it's just a big jump from some of those. I mean, if you think about the poem I read, that Awake at Night poem, right? Poems about stillness, poems about peace, right? Mm-hmm. And then this one is kind of the Mad Farmer poems often are the, I don't know, like the concept of the id kind of came to mind. Like as I read some of these, like the idea that it's just kind of the kind of wild, unchecked version of a farmer reacting to the world that he's stuck with.
Right. You
know, it's just this sort of like, I don't know if this phrase even makes sense, but like a noble id. It's like because when I think of id, you sometimes think of recklessness, right? Or like a toddler or something. But there's this kind of reckless because there's so much injustice surrounding him. And throughout that, the contrariness of the Mad Farmer poem, I think you get that a whole lot because it's just it's like anarchy, basically. Like it's just like, I'm just gonna, you want to tell me that everything's gonna be okay? I'm gonna tell you that everything's like falling apart. Or are you gonna tell me that like this season's gonna go well? I'm gonna say, well, maybe it won't. It's like it's almost like that scene in you guys watch Parks and Recreation. There's that scene where Chris Traeger, that character, he's all depressed about like, I guess not his love life, and April and Andy kind of get into a room and are trying to calm him down, and so they start saying opposite things. Like one says really great things, another one says really like terrible things, which culminates in them going, Dave Matthews Band. It's just that kind of like he's almost like, I'm going to be contrary just to balance everything out, because you can't trust what's true or what's not, or what's right or what's wrong, and so you might as well acknowledge it all.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the id. I mean, Ed McClanahan uses that as a in that foreword as a description of the Mad Farmer. It might be Wendell Berry's id. Yeah. So nice pick, Tim.
Need a little bell to ring when that happens, because it's not going to happen very often.
And just for a little more historical context, I didn't know this, and I get this from Wikipedia, so consider the source, but apparently Ed McClanahan was one of the Merry Pranksters.
What?
Yes. So the Merry Pranksters, for those of you who don't know, were this group of, including, and this makes sense because I think McClanahan and Berry both went to the University of Kentucky, and also McClanahan was a Stegner Fellow as well at Stanford. Yeah. So they're in San Francisco in the 60s. And the Merry Pranksters, and King Kesey was one of the group that was with these guys at Stanford, and he was heavily involved in the Merry Pranksters, this group that rode around in a psychedelically painted bus to various locations, having LSD parties, hosting LSD parties, and
with a little-known band known as the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Playing the music.
Heavily involved with the Grateful Dead. So, not saying Wendell Berry was part of this group, but the fact that he dedicated that first poem to Ed McClanahan You know,
What
sort
if
of gives you a flavor for the context of.
What if the Mad Farmer was inspired by Barry's one trip to a Kenkisi acid test?
Well, if you read
and
the Mad Farmer Revolution, that first poem, you kind of get
yeah,
that vibe, right? So
yeah, yeah. Gosh, that's interesting. You know, I'm sorry to like jump backwards a little bit, but I did just want to agree on the note of just the humor in the Mad Farmer poems, that I feel like he lets himself loose a little bit with the humor. And I think early on in this podcast in season 1, I mentioned something about the Barry has a tendency, which I enjoy, but he has a tendency to do these both this and that comparisons where he says like they are both born and unborn, or he likes to use those like where he describes something by using two opposites.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that falls into this kind of tendency to be contrary, and I just think it's also really ripe for the humor. I love the when they tell me God's dead, I answer, he goes fishing every day in the Kentucky River. I see him often. You can just sort of hear, you can kind of hear Burley Coulter saying that line or something like,
absolutely.
Some character like that.
Yeah, it's kind of yeah, I guess what I think of it as is a Dionysian figure, right? Dionysus plays this role in Greek mythology, right? As this god of revelry and chaos that somehow helps restore the sanity of the community. I'm thinking of a play like the Bacchae by Euripides. Yeah, that Dionysian figure that is present throughout literature after Greek literature. Nietzsche, I think, writes about the opposition between the Dionysian and the Apollonian modes of art, right? And I think that may sort of be what we see in this collection, with those more serious poems and with these more hilarious poems juxtaposing, both as a way of dealing with the very serious and terrible things going on in the world at the time.
I love that you brought this up, Jason, because I've read that Mad Farmer collection, including that forward, and had totally forgotten about that. And so as we get more and more into these Mad Farmer poems over the next couple seasons, it's great that's a corrective for me to not assume that it's a kind of a 1-to-1 correlation between Barry and the Mad Farmer. That it's an actual character. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jason, I know from a text that you sent that there was also something else in this collection that you definitely wanted to discuss.
And it's particularly in these Mad Farmer poems. I love the Mad Farmer as a character, and I want to unequivocally love the Mad Farmer as a character. But there are a couple moments where, particularly Barry's treatment of women in these poems, even if it is a joke, even if it is sort of a moment of this Dionysian sort of or id-driven chaos, I'm still uncomfortable with it, and I think particularly in the Mad Farmer Revolution, that first poem, I'll just read sort of the beginning of that poem. The Mad Farmer, the thirsty one, went dry. When he had time, he threw a visionary high lonesome on the Holy Communion wine. It is an awesome event when an earthen man has drunk his fill of the blood of a god, people said, and got out of his way. He plowed the churchyard, the minister's wife, 3 graveyards, and a golf course. In a parking lot, he planted a forest of little pines. He sanctified the groves, dancing at night in the oak shades with goddesses. He led up He led a field of corn to creep up and tassel like an Indian tribe on the courthouse lawn. Pumpkins ran out to the ends of their vines to follow him. Ripe plums and peaches reached into his pockets. Flowers sprang up in his tracks everywhere he stepped. And then his planter's eye fell on that parson's fair, fine lady again. "O holy plowman," cried she, "I am all grown up in weeds. Pray bring me back into good tilth." And he tilled her carefully, and laid her by, and she did bring forth others of her kind, and others, and some more. They sowed and reaped until all the countryside was filled with farmers and their brides sowing and reaping. When they died, they became two spirits of the woods. So again, you kind of get that psychedelic feeling. This is the one that is dedicated to Ed McClanahan.
Yeah.
I think of, again, the Greek god Dionysus. I also think of all of our Rabbit Room listeners will identify Tom Bombadil in these lines, probably from the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring.
I identified Thanos. Does that? I was like, this is like a hillbilly Thanos. This is like he's just...
Thanos. Wow. Oh,
I don't know. It's just yeah.
But I mean I don't know, guys. That line, he plowed the churchyard, the minister's wife, 3 graveyards, and a golf course. I mean, it's funny, but like, is there? I can't help but interpret a level of violence towards women there that is troubling to me. And obviously this is 1970, this is pre-Me Too, but at the same time, like I don't know. What do you guys make of it?
It's about as explicit as I can. I mean, as far as in my memory goes, that he ever gets, as far as like using language and sex, right?
Right.
And that is, I'm with you there. That it seems. So I'll also go back to, like, we're talking about the Mad Farmer being a character,
Right.
and I think we have to then talk about, like, is this Mad Farmer a perfect character, right?
Right.
So if this Mad Farmer is this sort of like wild, unchecked character, then there are things about them that I don't think reading lines like those, while like they might be troubling, I just have to like think about them as is them being troubling possibly the point, because this is somebody who's kind of risen out of the ashes of the late 60s, and as Vietnam is heating up and all this, that it's just like anything goes, because that's, I mean, it's kind of how you learn a lot about the 60s, and that's kind of the vibe people were getting. So I don't know that we're supposed to be like, I don't think Barry's intending us to cheer him on. I don't know if that makes sense. But the language that's used, I do acknowledge that the amount of like humor in pairing a churchyard, a minister's wife, a graveyard, and a golf course in a line definitely kind of makes it seemingly like he's intending it to be comical.
Right. Right. What do you think, John?
I have struggled with this since getting your text, kind of giving us a heads up that this was coming, and I reread basically the second, maybe the last 2/3 of the collection, sort of with that in mind. I guess I didn't sense the violence in it. Gosh, it seems so strange to use the language I'm about ready to use in this setting, but like I didn't assume it was non-consensual.
Right. I mean, later in the poem, it seems like it is consensual, right?
Yeah. But I think having the conversation we just had about who the Mad Farmer is, imagine, like, so put yourself in my position before 10 minutes ago, and I thought the Mad Farmer was Wendell Berry. So it's actually looking way better.
You're like, Tanya read these poems?
Right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and I should say, my wife read, and man, I don't know. I had her read this poem as well, and asked her what she thought, and she sort of acknowledged that what I was saying is there, but at the same time, it's not something that offended her right off the bat. I don't know. I think it's my. I think in that text I sent you guys, I said I'm going to be the liberal lit crit worrywart uh, of the podcast again, and I've just been trained to read literature with that perspective of, okay, how are women being portrayed? What is the obviously it's a male speaker, a male character, like what is the orientation, what are the power dynamics, and things like that. And that's just kind of how what I bring to any text, for better for worse, as a result of that training. Yeah, I don't know. It does help me that it's not, I just read that tonight as well, that it's definitely not Wendell Berry himself. It's not a stand-in. But yeah, I still, in particularly in our age, where we're just now beginning to have public conversations about about this kind of issue. I'm still a little uncomfortable with it, but that just may have to be where we leave it.
If it's okay, I'd like to actually bring up some of the language specifically from your text, because you mentioned in there that it didn't seem like the women in these poems have much agency, and you were talking about the analogy between women and fertile farmland. And it does seem like in the Mad Farmer Revolution poem that you just read, it seems like the female character, the minister's wife, is there to bear the children of the Mad Farmer.
Right.
Like his job is to till, to sow seeds, and her job is to give birth to the Mad Farmer's vision.
Right.
Is that, I mean, because
I think that's the way to read it. Yeah.
On rereading, like I can see that.
Yeah. Well, and it does seem like his he's also there to upset the order of things, right? That's why it's the minister's wife, right? Like who is going to be the most, faithful to her husband. I mean, he's not the minister, so we're talking about him having sex with the minister's wife, the mad farmer's there to upset the order of things that, I don't know, might be considered to be insane insofar as we know about Barry's sort of view of the organized religion of the time. And then that she is just, kind of a pawn in this game. I mean, maybe that's a little too strong. Maybe that's a little more uncharitable, because she does seem to want to go along with him. But yeah, I don't know. It's a little troubling to me still, but
yeah. There's also the trope of like the minister's wife being like the more influential of the two. I don't know if that would factor in there as well. And the other like interpretation I was going to toss in, kind of to piggyback what you guys just brought up, is, this is just thinking out loud basically, but is there potential for the Mad Farmer character to be a sort of collective character that's like supposed to be standing in for like a group, right? That it's not a character that is this one fictional person who's running, like raising hell through Kentucky or whatever, but being this concept of the sort of radical farmer, like the person who's back at the land and who is doing things opposite of what the rest of the world is telling him he should do, and is sort of having this sort of, I don't know, sort of dishing out this anarchy around the land, because he is refusing to match what the world's given him.
I think we're gonna I think we're going to come up into some poems, maybe even in the next collection, in which very explicitly compares farming and marriage. And this is something that's actually a metaphor that's been really, really powerful for my wife and me, as we to think about like the importance of kind of staying within your bounds. Like we flourish as we sort of stay within the bounds. We don't kind of covet what's in our neighbor's field. And so you have this very, very beautiful metaphor of flourishing by staying within bounds, and then you have something quite different in the Mad Farmer Revolution.
Yeah, yeah.
Where it's like he's straying outside the accepted bounds.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And reading this, that is a good point. Sort of again, reading this, like I mentioned earlier, with the Mad Farmer's feelings about being at a wedding versus Barry's, thoughts about marriage. Very poignant, very helpful thoughts about marriage. Thinking about this in that context might help with this farmer as just sort of an id-driven, figure.
Yeah,
because this is also this is the same character, which we read this poem in our live episode at Hutchmoot, but I mean, this is the same character that gives us arguably our favorite poem from Berry period, which is the Manifesto, which definitely the character of the Manifesto seems a little more mature or something,
right.
than the contrariness one. They seem like a little bit of a different character, at least in a different time of life. I don't know if maybe the Mad Farmer is his go-to poetic voice for reacting to a time.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's interesting. Well, and this one is what's interesting about this poem, the Mad Farmer Revolution, is that it's in third person, right? It's not first person from the Mad Farmer like those other ones are.
Good point.
So, yeah. Any other poems that the two of you really want to talk about?
Well, I don't have much of a note on it, but one poem that I found just interesting because it was different than other poems that I'd seen from Berry so far in my life was taking another look at The Birth near Port William.
Mm-hmm.
And what it caught me is really interesting because just to summarize, it is it was interesting because it's a narrative poem in a lot of ways. It's telling a story, and you don't really see that often in his work and his poetry. And it made me think. This poem tells the story of some men who are up very late at night in lambing season, which of course, as I was reading through it, I was like, come on, when's the whiskey going to come up? I was like, please be a tall, Proudfoot story. But when I was reading this and hearing about them, they're up late, they're lambing, and then they walk. They're having this kind of common conversation with one another, and then they go next door, and I'm going to read this section. It says, this is after they had dealt with the lambs, and they're talking about being up so late, and he says, they were already on their way, dry leaves underfoot and mud under leaves, to another barn on down along the wood's edge, an old stripping room, where by the light of the open stove door they saw the man and the woman and the child lying on a bed of straw on the dirt floor. Well, look there, the old man said. First time this ever happened there. Here. And Billy, looking away, said, howdy, howdy, bad night. And Raymond said, there's a first time, they say, for everything. And then they get into this really rich imagery about the wind. And here, you hear the singing of the wind and who is that. And I really enjoyed it, and it had this kind of nativity imagery to it that is this notion of these men who are just in the most common of situations, who are just lambing late at night, that they kind of stumble across this situation, and they give you and you get this kind of three wise men feel about them, that there's just these three men who drop in, they stuff $3 in the door frame for them when they're done, and it was just a really nice story, and there's also, it's one of those that even here at this point where I've read it a few times, I'm ready to go back and kind of keep mining it for more, because there's just a lot of really interesting imagery there. There's a Ron Rash. It's actually a poem and a story that I really, really love, and it's called 3 a.m. and the Stars Were Out. And it's the story of two old friends who actually, I think it was Vietnam. They served in Vietnam, and late at night, one of them is a veterinarian who's retired. He comes over to his friend's house, and they help each other help a calf be born late at night, and they're wondering, like, man, if only our kids knew what we were doing. And it's just this very slow, kind of contemplative story where they're reflecting on their life together. And so it was written originally as a poem, and then he eventually wrote a short story, 3 a.m. and the Stars Were Out. But I don't know if anything about that one struck out to you two fellers.
Maybe it's just because of the season we're in, but I definitely thought of the Nativity as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that's what he's begging us to do, right? Mm-hmm. But you heard that singing in the wind, Billy said. What about that? Ghosts, they do that way. Not that way. Scared him, it did. The old man laughed. We'll have to hold his damn hand for him and lead him home. It's got that humor, the humor stepping into it as well. I love any piece of his work that shows the most common activity possible, the most mundane thing possible, and then kind of blowing it up and showing the spectacular within the mundane.
Right. And there's that. I mean, throughout this collection, I think he's talking about sex more than he talks about. He has thus far, at least, right? And there's the when they're sort of sitting around talking, and one of the guys says, I'd like to be at home in bed. He says, "Damn," he said, "I'd like to be asleep. I'd like to be curled up in a warm nest like an old groundhog and sleep till spring." Then another guy says, "When I was your age, Billy, it wasn't sleep I thought about," Uncle Stanley said. "Last few years here, I took to sleeping." So.
Yeah.
Good stuff there. Another poem that stood out to me, especially in the polarized social media world we live in, is "A Standing Ground." And it's short. I'd love to just read it if that's all right with you guys.
Yeah.
However just and anxious I have been, I will stop and step back from the crowd of those who may agree with what I say and be apart. There is no earthly promise of life or peace, but where the roots branch and weave their patient, silent passages in the dark. Uprooted, I have been furious without an aim. I am not bound for any public place, but for ground of my own, where I have planted vines and orchard trees, and in the heat of the day climbed up into the healing shadow of the woods. Better than any argument is to rise at dawn and pick dew-wet red berries in a cup. I just love that as a reminder. I do think that there is a place, maybe more so than Berry does. I do think that there is a place for public engagement and political engagement, but at the same time, it's important to remind oneself that, screaming into the void of social media is probably not going to do as much good as paying attention to the people and the place that you are a part of, and engaging with that. So a good poem to take into an election year anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's funny that poem, that was one that I kind of skirted by without really saying anything about it. I didn't mark much about it. I don't think I didn't dislike it, but having that sort of, so I could use this phrase a lot. I know I do it in class a lot, but that lens is really valuable. It reminds me of, I don't know if you guys have ever watched the show Hot Ones. I'm sorry to make this reference, but it's on YouTube, but it's a guy who interviews musicians and actors and filmmakers and things, and over the course of the conversation, they eat progressively hotter wings. So like by the last one, like by the 10th wing, it's this like unreal like Scoville level wing. So people end up saying kind of like interesting things because they're just like they're just in pain from these wings. But I saw Ricky Gervais on there, and he was describing what's wrong with social media, like why, because he's on it obviously, but one thing he hates about it, he's like the metaphor he uses, and I'm gonna soften the language that he uses, but he says that the internet can basically be summed up in this interaction. It's like if it was a real world thing that you came across in your daily life, imagine looking up at a cork board, like a bulletin board, and somebody walks up and sees an advertisement for guitar lessons, and instead of just keep walking, they grab the notice off the board and they say, "I don't want any friggin' guitar lessons. Take these guitar lessons back." Like throws them on the ground, steps on the advertisement. Like that's what we we do, and I think that's the complete inverse of what you're saying in this poem. And I mean, imagine if he was writing that same poem today, because I'm sure he was feeling like the news and just the issues of the day were totally overwhelming.
Sure.
And totally all encompassing. But today it feels like there are 10 of those a day sometimes because of how people, or because of how the world presents us our information.
Sure.
John, do you have one more so we don't end on a Ricky Gervais reference on Hot Ones?
I do.
Yeah.
Yep. I really liked the poem "The Silence." All throughout, one of the things that I experienced throughout rereading this collection is just the deep desire to make going outside and just wandering a more regular discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the chance, even as I just did it, like even just thinking about it, I took a really deep breath. And I think it's just something that my body and my soul needs. And that was just not just reinforced, but it came up again and again as I was reading his poems, just sort of in the midst of the madness of the world, taking time to wander and to watch and to sit and be still, and to watch the birds and the trees. And I've probably even said that on this show before, like on our podcast before, and that I'm bringing it up again shows that I have not done it yet. I have not made that the regular discipline it needs to be. But this poem gets at some of that. Again, it's called "The Silence." What must a man do to be at home in the world? There must be times when he is here as though absent, gone beyond words into the woven shadows of the grass and the flighty darknesses of leaves shaking in the wind, and beyond the sense of the weariness of engines and of his own heart, his wrongs grown old, unforgiven. It must be with him as though his bones fade beyond thought into the shadows that grow out of the ground, so that the furrow he opens in the earth opens in his bones, and he hears the silence of the tongues of the dead tribesmen buried here 1,000 years ago. And then what presences will rise up before him? Weeds bearing flowers, and the dry wind rain. What songs he will hear.
Get some rare Wendell Berry exclamation marks.
That's true. Well, it's been fun to talk about this collection. I'm excited because in our next episode, episode 5, we are getting to our first ever novel. We're going to be talking about Nathan Coulter. Have either of you read Nathan Coulter before?
I actually haven't. I'm surprised I haven't, but I haven't.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I read it, and I think I've only ever read it once. Hopefully Jason will be able to join us, but if not, he will have an awesome reason to not be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. And thank you for listening to this episode of The Membership. A couple things we want to remind you of. You can find us at our website at membershippod.com. And we're on all of the social channels, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at Membership Pod. Love to connect with you there. We have a Patreon account, so if you'd like to support the show, we'd be really grateful. It will help us cover some of the hosting fees and equipment and some of those sorts of things. And you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/membershippod. If you would not mind doing us another favor, if you would rate and review us on iTunes, that would really help with our visibility and help other people discover the podcast. We discussed today Farming, a Handbook, which was written in 1970 by Wendell Berry. We used a text from the New Collected Poems, which is copyright Counterpoint Press 2012. The Membership is a proud member of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. You can find more great podcasts at rabbitroom.com/podcast.